Okay, open up your Bibles toward the end of Genesis chapter 29. Genesis chapter 29. We're going to continue that study. We ended right there around 31. Yeah, verses 31 to 35. Jacob has been living with Laban for those two wives, right? What's the name of his the two wives? Leah and Rachel. I don't know why Rebecca got popped in my head. And so we're going to start there at verses 31 to 35. Genesis chapter 29. Now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben, for she said, "Because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me." Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, "Because the Lord has heard that, I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also." So she named him Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son and said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore he was named Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped bearing. Okay. So it opens up there with verse 31 with that word unloved. Literally in the Hebrew it's hated. I understand why the New American Standard translators changed that to unloved, because we see that word hate and it's very harsh sounding and it means something different than the way the Hebrews used it. It simply meant to them loved less. Not that Jacob, lavished any kind of amount of love. He loved her and did things for her, but not like he loved Rachel. So he loved Leah less, probably a lot less than he loved Rachel. Now, when you look at this, and we all know the section, especially down there when it gets into chapter 30, going through all the different sons born into one daughter that's mentioned there. Why is so much detail given to us about these births? And what is the most obvious reason? The 12 tribes. It's telling us about the coming of the 12 tribes. And when you read things, there's always telling and there's sometimes showing. The telling here is, Moses wants to tell us, here's the 12 fathers of the 12 tribes. What is he also showing us in this passage? Something pretty significant. To put it simply, don't have more than one wife. And he shows that all throughout. There is a lot of tension, bitterness, envying, and difficulty in this household. And it doesn't go away. Doesn't go away. And we're going to see that as we work through the text, especially in chapter 30. We're going to look at that right now. That's right. Look at the way she names it. And we're going to compare that to Rachel's attitude when we get into chapter 30. Very good. That's a good point. Because when you look there, how does she name her kids? Well, actually, before we get into that, there at the very beginning, we see that she's barren, right? She couldn't have kids because it says that the Lord opened her womb because she was unloved. Now, I'm thinking maybe she wasn't barren there, but she'll become barren. Who else is barren? Well, we haven't gotten to that verse yet. It's in chapter 3, verse 1. Rachel can't have kids. This is the third time. So every time we come across the line of Abraham, the wife is barren. Every time. I think that's interesting that continues to happen. But looking at the names, you got Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. The name for Reuben means literally see a son in the book of Hebrews. This is normal for whenever something specific or something marvelous in their a family's sight would occur at birth, they would name the child. Didn't always happen that way, But in the case of Leah, she does it with all the kids. We see that happening with all of Rachel's kids and the midwives' kids as well. So she says, look, see a son. And who does she want to see that she has a son? Jacob. Jacob. He doesn't love her. Why? Because that's not the wife he wanted. He wanted Rachel. He was tricked into marrying Leah. And then Simeon. And this one is hearing. Hearing. Who does she want to hear? What does it say specifically there? Conceived again, verse 33, and bore a son, and because the Lord has heard, I am unloved. So she's been praying to the Father, as Jim was pointing out. She's a prayerful woman. She has faith. And she sees that God has heard and given her another son. And she's happy for that because in that day and age, the mindset of a woman who gets married, what is the one thing she's expected to do for her husband? Produce sons. Produce sons. And so if you don't have sons, you're looked down upon in society. Rachel points out she is not happy. She feels like she's cursed. Then Levi means grow attached there at verse 34. Now this time my husband will become attached to me because I've borne him 3 sons. How sad. What for her and her life. Oh man, I've had 3 sons. Now my husband, well, he'll love me. Now he'll be attached to me. I mean, look at this. I've given him 3 sons. What has Rachel done? Nothing. She's given 3 sons. And then Judah. What's different? Let's read that one again, verse 35. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped bearing. Wasn't about Jacob. It was about the Lord. This is a woman of good faith, I think. That's what I see here, Leah. And it is sad to see all these things happen. Now, when did Jacob marry Leah and Rachel? After 7 years. Married them both. And how long did he have to serve Laban for Rachel? Another 7 years. And when we get to verse 25, right after Joseph is married, it says, now it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Why? Because he's finished his service to Laban. 7 years. 11 kids. And I'm going to put up a chart here in just a moment, and we're going to analyze that. That has to happen just right for even though there's 4 wives, it has to happen just right in order for all that to fit into 7 years. So let's go ahead and drop down to verse 30, unless there's any questions on that last section of chapter 29. All right, verse 1 and 2. Chapter 30. I'm sorry. Yeah, chapter 30, verses 1 and 2. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister. And she said to Jacob, give me children, or else I die. Then Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Okay. Is it understandable that Rachel would be upset? Yeah, it's understandable. But how did she deal with that? Who did she blame? Jacob. And when you look at her reaction and you look at how Leah is responding to the situation, Leah is in a bad situation too. She's getting children, but she has a husband who doesn't love her. But she still turns to God. We don't see Rachel doing that, do we? And what does she tell him? She makes an ultimatum. Give me kids or else I'm going to die. How is that going to happen? Maybe she's cursing herself. She's going to take her own life. What is she saying? It's a sign of great immaturity. Does Jacob have any control over this? No, he understands exactly how this works. That's up to God. You're angry with, not me, but with God. And he points that out to her. And he's got he's got a right to be upset and angry about why she makes that kind of statement. Think about being Jacob. You come home and you got 2 wives, and they're at each other's throats because who else is Rachel upset with? Leah. She's not happy with her at all. He's got to come home to this all the time, sharing himself to 2 different wives. And he's got the one that he does love the most. She's unhappy. And we go on in verse 3. She, that's Rachel, said, "Here is my maid, Bilhah. Go in her, that she may bear on my knees, that through her I too may have children." So she gave him her maid, Bilhah, as a wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me, and has indeed heard my voice, and has given me a son." Therefore she named him Dan. Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. So Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and have indeed prevailed." And she named him Naphtali. All right, so 2 kids. Well, let's take a look. So she gives the handmaid, or the slave that was given to her, to Jacob. That is typical of the Oriental culture back then. They would often have these slaves that would be used, usually later on in life, to continue having more children. So she jumps the gun a little early because she couldn't have kids, and gives her maid. And everyone in that day and age and culture would see those children as being Rachel's children. That's how they would see it, because everyone saw those things as being blessings from God. And look at the way Rachel responds to each one of these. So there it is. Sorry. God has vindicated me, there at verse 6. And that word vindicated can be judged, but I like the word vindicated, but it's really judged, has judged me. And she means judged me as being more righteous in her mind toward her sister. Has seen me, seen my affliction, and so she names him Dan, which means he judged. The next one, Naphtali, wrestling, there at verse 8. And Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister. Some see this as her wrestling with God in prayer, and wrestling with her sister. So what we're getting here is a picture of this household. How does Rachel see her relationship with Leah, the older sister? Bad. Yes, this is the enemy. It's the enemy. She's wrestling with her, and she's looking to God as a judgment between her and her sister, and it's not a good attitude, not a good attitude to have. And this is the life that Jacob is living. These 7 years between these 2 women, and now also the 2 handmaids as well. And he's getting lots of sons, being very blessed, but lots of difficulty there in his house. Then Leah gives her sons that are at verse 11? Verse 9. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid, Zilpah, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's maid, Zilpah, bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, "How fortunate!" So she named him Gad. Leah's maid, Zilpah, bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "Happy am I, for women will call me happy." So she named him Asher. So you have Gad. Gad actually means luck, not fortunate, as the New American Standard says. I think they use that because a lot of people think, or in the commentaries think, that she's naming him after the god of luck of that age, which was a very popular god. And I don't believe that's true, but it's really luck. So Gad's name is good luck, is what his name means. Asher is the word for fortunate and fortune there in verse 13. And then we get to an interesting section, but before we jump into that, I want to look at all all the kids. No. I want to keep going for it. Then we'll go and look at that. I'm sorry. Verses 14 to 21. Now in the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter for you to take my husband? And would you take my son's mandrakes also?" So Rachel said, "Therefore he may lie with you tonight, in return for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came in from the field in the evening, then Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." Reuben has to be, and I'll show this in a little bit, has to be at 4 years old. I gotta skip that slide. I think I put the other slide. Oh, there it is. Here's the mandrake flower and the berries. The berries are probably about that big below the flower. So you got a 4-year-old. He's going out there to the fields. He sees these pretty flowers. He sees these mandrake, and he just picks them and brings them to his mother. Rachel is there present with her when this happens or occurs. And so he brings them, and Rachel asks for the mandrakes. I think it's an innocent request. She's not trying to start anything, and she asks for it because in that day and age, the mandrake berries were seen as an aphrodisiac, and she wants to have kids. She wants to have her own children. And so she asks, "Hey, let me have some of those mandrakes that your son brought in." And Leah kind of dresses her down, doesn't she? I mean, it seems a little over the top. And because she sees, again, it's that envying, it's the infighting that's happening between the two and with Jacob. So, you stole my husband. Now you want to take my son's mandrakes too? Really? And so, to Rachel's credit, she sues for peace. Well, you can have Jacob. That's fine. Just calm down. So she gets Jacob for that night, and she gets the mandrakes. Then after that, verse 17, God gave heed to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Then Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my maid to my husband." So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore a 6th son to Jacob. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good gift. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons." So she named him Zebulun. Afterward she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God gave heed to her and opened her womb. So she conceived and bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." She named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord give me another son." So, and then we've already read verse 25 that it came about when Rachel bore Joseph that Jacob said to Laban. So we know at that point it's the end of the 7 years. So let's look at first those couple of names. You got poor Jacob coming in from work again and having to deal with the infighting of his 2 wives. God gives heed to the prayers of Leah there, so she must have been praying still and opened her womb, and Issachar is born. That name means there is reward. And then verse 19 to 20, Zebulun. That's sad. Now surely my husband will dwell with me. His name means dwelling. And we don't see that happening. I think, it's my opinion, as we've already mentioned in the past, I think that down the road, Jacob does love Leah down the road, but it definitely does not happen here. And we're also told that Dinah is born, the daughter, and he has other daughters as well, but this particular one, you're smiling, am I saying it wrong? Dinah, well, Dinah. Oh. Yeah, it could be after Rachel that she dies soon after this when Benjamin's born. But yeah, I could be too. And closer. Yeah, we were talking about that last week. They're probably closer to Jacob's age than we think, probably younger, but Jacob's mother is Laban's brother, and these are his daughters, so they should be pretty close in age. Well, and so that's right. So are they, yeah. So I want us to look at. I got up here. I know the columns are backwards, but the second column is Genesis 29 to 30 that we're looking at, and it's the listing of as each one is born there. You got the 4 from Laban, the 2 from Rachel's handmaid, the 2 from Leah's handmaid. Then Leah has 2 more, and then Joseph's born, Benjamin later. So we got 11 born in this section. 7-year period. Now Leah has 6 kids. How long does it take to have a kid? Not much. On both sides, right? And so you put about a year in recovery time. 6 years. But she's also barren and can't have kids for a little time. That's why she has those other 2. So you can't go 6, 7, 8, and then plus the ones for Rachel. Some of these kids are born at the same time. In chapter 49, this is the blessings that Jacob gives. He does it in groups. He does Leah's group first. The second group are the handmaids. The last group are the ones from Rachel's kids. Now, I think he does those in groups, but then within the groups, I think he puts them in order of when they were born. The only thing that's backward that doesn't work with that is Zebulun and Issachar, because Zebulun was born before Issachar, and we know that from chapter 30. It makes it pretty clear. So I don't know why they're flipped in chapter 49 there, but everything else, I think that's how they were born. I think when the handmaids start having their kids, that is the order the kids come. Dan, then Gad, Asher, then Naphtali. And that's the order they came in. Now, I do believe Issachar and Zebulun came later, and then Joseph at the end. And some of them had to overlap, and they could have. They would have to in order for all 11 to fit in the 7-year period. All 11 being born. So they're pretty close to in their ages to one another. It's not a very large gap for 11 kids. That's. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. 9 also. I'm not counting all the daughters, and there's actually several more daughters. But what's that? Yes, she was also born at that time period, along with a couple of other daughters as well. That's a lot of kids in 7 years, but they're overlapping. So there are being times where Leah is pregnant and the handmaids are pregnant as well. So, and even while these other 2, Issachar and Zebulun, are being born, there's probably more daughters being born to the handmaids that we're not told about. Why is Dinah being mentioned here specifically? Just like the handmaids are mentioned to us beforehand, because they're going to be pertinent in the story later on, in her case, chapter 34. And so we have all this taking place in a very short time period. Now, in verses 22 to 24, Rachel has her first kid, and it's not because of the mandrakes. She got the mandrakes, and a couple more kids are born first. You got a couple of years go by before she can have Joseph. Joseph is the youngest of the 11. And so some time goes by, and it's not working out for her. And from what I see, the way she acts and talks here, she's very humbled at this point. Notice the way she says these things. She conceived and bore a son and said, verse 23, God has taken away my reproach. She named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord give me another son." And the word Joseph in the Hebrew is an ingenious name to give, because depending on how it's used in a Hebrew sentence, it can mean one of two things. It can mean to add another, or it can mean to take away. And so she's using that name and saying because the Lord took away her reproach, and she's asking God for one more son. Very wise. And so God took those things away, and he will give her another son. I see a change of heart happening in Rachel. What?
How would you like to be Joseph? Hey, I just met you, but you're not in the honeymoon.
Well, it wasn't just that. It was that way with all the kids. As many sons as you can give. They want sons. And Jacob has now got 11 of them. And it's going very well for him. And so you have all these kids. Benjamin's going to come later on. We know when that happens, Rachel will die at that birth. But in this section of chapter 30, like we were saying in the beginning, Moses is telling us something and he's showing us something. Don't have bigamy. Don't have multiple wives. It doesn't go well. It does not go well at all. And you would think that people would learn that lesson throughout the Bible, but they do not. It never, ever goes well. There's always friction and there's always tension in the house. Jacob didn't even like to be home. He was always out there working. And when he came home, it was always something new. And he even talks about how his life is rough toward the end. He had a rough life. He made a lot of bad decisions. He should have just stuck with Leah and let it be that. But he did not. Any comments or questions on the text, or we can't know for certain who was born first. We can be pretty sure about Leah's, but once you start getting into the handmaid's kids, it's hard to know which ones are really the oldest. I like having chapter 49. I think that's a good way to determine who's older and younger. I think Issachar and Zebulun are younger than the ones from the handmaid women, but we can't know everything for certain. And it is interesting the way Moses gives it to us in these two chapters. But he does jump around. And there had to be overlap there. There had to be, in order for it to fit into 7 years.
Just to point out, this list of the 12 prophets, this isn't 12 prophets, these are 12 sons.
Yeah, those are the 12 sons.
Right, you're a different group.
Well, Joseph is the 12. It comes from his 2 sons, but yeah, and Levi doesn't get one. Right. But you know what I mean. But yeah, you're right. All right. Any other comments? Questions? All right. We're going to pick up in a very interesting section of chapter 30 next week with Laban convincing Jacob to stick around a little longer, and how he amasses his wealth, and Laban loses pretty much all his wealth, and we'll examine that next week. All right, we're going to close out with a song, number 638, "Blessed Be the Tie That Binds," and Gary will be leading us in a closing